Now we're going to move on to the main talk for our gathering today. Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome up the Executive Director of Houston Oasis, Mike House. Let's give him a round of applause.
This is what you get on holiday Sundays. I accidentally double-dosed my blood pressure medicine this morning, so if I keel over, that's probably why it is, but I know we have at least one physician in the house, so we got two. Okay, wait, what? Yeah, so I'll take all the help I can get. I'm okay so far, just kind of. All right. So today I just want to spend a little time thinking about with you the kind of the changing religious landscape, and also to clear up, because I know we have a few first-timers here today, and there's a misconception that, like, you know, what does a group of non-believers do on a Sunday that we're like monomaniacally fixated on religion? We're not. Our talks are actually all over the place. We talked about birds, and we actually do not spend our time talking about religion because it's really not important to a lot of us, but occasionally we do talk about religion because it is part of the human experience. And sometimes I do that because just by default, because I kind of know something about it. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the changing religious landscape, and then I've used several sources for this, but one of the main sources was a big study that came out from the well-respected Pew Research last year. So I'm going to post that link in the private Facebook group probably later today. And so, like Johnny said, this is a good chance to join the private Facebook group because you'll be able to see some of the stats that I'm mentioning today and many more if you're interested in the topic. And then I want to talk a little bit about why this matters to free thinkers. So that's where we're going to go this morning. So the first thing to note about the changing religion scene in America is something we pretty much all know. America is quickly becoming more and more secular, less and less religious. In 2007, the religiously unaffiliated, that is the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, which is becoming a term that people are recognizing more and more. I got applause already. From Mike's cell phone.
A note on what you were saying.
So it was 16% of the population in the United States in 2007 were the nuns. Now, well, as of 2014, which is the last year we have good data for, it's up to 23%. So that's a pretty astonishing increase. So we're definitely trending secular. That means that the only large religious group in America that's larger than the nuns are the evangelicals, and they still are slightly over 25% of the population. But that also is down since 2007, because in 2007 they were 26.3%, now they're 25.4%. So really almost as many nuns as there are evangelicals. The overall share of Christians in the United States has now dropped to just below 71%, which is an all-time low. The trend towards religious non-affiliation among the millennials is astonishing. 36% of millennials are not affiliated with any religion. Millennials being people born between 1981 and 1996 would be the millennials. So, younger people, way less religious even than the general population. Now, in addition to increasing secularism, there are a number of other trends that are worth noting. Roman Catholicism is in retreat. The Roman Catholic Church in the United States is losing more members than any other major denomination. Since 2007, in absolute numbers, the Roman Catholic Church has lost 3 million people in the United States. For a long time, Catholics comprise approximately 25% of the population in the United States, and that was a statistic that held for like generations. About 1 in 4 Americans were Roman Catholic. That is no longer true. Now it's just about 20%. And there again, it was a drop from 2007 to 2014. And 13% of Americans describe themselves as former Catholics. Even the Southern Baptist Convention has not been immune. to these trends. Let's see, and this was from a different survey, but in 2014, the Southern Baptist Convention announced its largest annual decline in 130 years. In 1 year, they announced a decline of some 286,000 people. And since the year 2000, the Southern Baptist Convention has lost about 800,000 people. They still got 15 million, so they got a long way to go. All right. Now, despite the stunning decline across the board for many denominations, evangelicals as a whole have remained remarkably steady. They're not growing much, they're having modest growth, but their percentage, as we noted before, of the overall American population is shrinking slowly. Nevertheless, in an age of decreasing religiosity and increasing secularism, American evangelicals in America are pretty much holding their own for the time being. But what is also interesting, though, is even in, and this comes from a survey of megachurches, this is starting to worry folks in the religious arena, is that there's some first hard evidence that even people who are active members of a lot of religious groups are becoming less active. They're not leaving, but they're becoming, like, attending worship less often. So, for example, in megachurches in America, the median median weekly attendance at megachurches in the United States was 3,800 in 2010. In 2014, that number had dropped to 2,696, just in the space of 4 years. So even the average worship at megachurches is starting to drop. So, by all measures, the United States is becoming more secular. Dramatically so, and less religious and more diverse. So my question is, if we're becoming more secular, then why doesn't it feel like it? Why does religion seem just as potent a force in our public life as it ever has been before? So that candidates for president and other political office continue to insert religious language into their platforms, into their agendas, and into the public conversation. And even as a political candidate, if you don't know much about the Bible, you at least have to pretend to like 2 Corinthians. Here are a couple guesses, and they're only guesses on my part, but they seem plausible. First of all, as a shift to secularism becomes more apparent, it wouldn't surprise me at all that religious people are going to push back harder. I'll bet that's part of what's happening with the transgender bathroom issue, because when your movement loses issue after issue in the culture war, you got to find some other place where you can make a stand. And that's why they're focusing their energies on things like the transgender bathroom thing. But there's another reason why we're going to have to contend with religion in public life, I think, for a very long time, and why religions are going to continue to influence public discourse even as we become a more secular nation. And I think it's simply because they are better organized. They have the infrastructure, they have money, they have vast networks that they have been working generations and generations to build. And they have an organizational capacity for vast cultural influence that freethinkers have yet to develop in this country. British philosopher Alain de Botton, who someone told me he had a op-ed piece in the New York Times today. Interesting guy. A couple of years ago, he wrote a book called Religion for Atheists. That he's a non-believer, and it's an interesting little book. It's a quick read. I wouldn't rush out and buy it, but if you happen to see it at half price, pick it up. They're having a sale this weekend, 20% off. A lot of book lovers in our crowd. And Alain de Botton, in his book Religion for Atheists, makes this observation, which, and I'm going to mangle it. I wasn't able to look it up again because I loaned the book to someone and it never came back. So I'm just going on what I remember. But he makes this observation that that freethinkers that secular people don't have more cultural influence because they haven't spent much time building the institutions and organizations and networks and relationships that it takes to change things. He says freethinkers are really good at writing books that are fun and interesting to read. They're really good at creating angry blogs and that kind of thing. But he said books have a very limited capacity to change people and society. Books generally don't change the world the way that institutions do. Institutions and organizations have the ability to touch way more lives than books do. And I might have oversimplified his argument, but that's kind of the gist of it, and to me it kind of makes sense. Case in point would be, somehow in the midst of doing my research this week, I stumbled across an email sent out by Pastor Rick Warren of Saddleback Church, the purpose-driven guy. And he sends out, apparently, a weekly email to a vast network of pastors of many denominations all over the world that are part of their purpose-driven network, pastors.com. So he has like this weekly advice column for pastors. And this week, or it's actually 2 weeks ago now, the topic of his email was how pastors need to courageously confront the culture from the pulpit. So I thought, I'm going to check this out. I'll look at what the other side is up to. Well, man, this stuff is usually pretty mild, but this was a rant. And basically a long rant where he highlights the pressing cultural issues that pastors need to be tackling. Things like, this is the burning issues of our day from his perspective. Hedonism, materialism, individualism, socialism, and that whole section was basically a long critique of Bernie Sanders without mentioning his name. But then he got into the really big topics, which was the sanctity of life, and he says, no abortion, never, for any reason, it is God's will, always has been. And then sanctity of sex, sex can only happen between a man and a woman in marriage, it was God's will and always has been, okay? But I'm going to read you a quick, I have the entire thing here if you want to, if your blood pressure is too low, you can read this. But I'm going to read just a little snippet to give you a sense of, and there is a point to reading this to you, so hang on, just bear with me. My highlighting doesn't show up in the funky lights of the exclusive dance studio. Okay, here we go. That's an important descriptor. Okay, again, this is part of the weekly email from Pastor Rick Warren. We have the crumbling of our culture, crisis in our schools, controversies in our courts, corruption in our businesses, chaos in our government, carnality in our churches. He likes alliteration, apparently. Confusion in our families, and conflicts in our personal lives. And when I read that, I thought, wow, I need a drink, but apparently the Lord doesn't approve of that either. So now here's the thing. The guy who wrote this has a lot of influence. That email went out to thousands of preachers who are then going to create messages influenced by his thoughts that are going to be heard by hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people in our country. Like I said, if you want to hear more of that, I can share it with you later. And that is the power of institutions and organizations and networks that religious people have been building for generations. Spending a lot of time on Reddit or commenting on free thought blogs or ranting on Facebook might feel cathartic, and that stuff may serve a purpose, I guess, don't get me wrong. But it's not really going to be able to compete in terms of influence with the vast network of organizations and networks and relationships that the religious have. And that's why, for the time being, I think their cultural and political clout is going to be a force to be reckoned with, despite their declining numbers. The other day I was listening to a fascinating recent TED Talk, and I can post this. I think I'm going to post this one too, because I thought it's really gripping, from a scholar, and I have to look at her name because it's a Turkish name, Zeynep Tufekci. She teaches at the University of North Carolina, and the title of her TED Talk was "Why Are Social Causes Easy to Launch but Hard to Win?" And she has studied, she's in the School of Information and Library Science, and she's all about the disseminating of information. And one of her passions has been studying the way that all these kind of popular movements that have popped up in recent decades, she's been involved, like going to visit personally in the midst of it and studying what's going on. She's been involved in everything from the Zapatista rebellion in the 90s to Occupy Wall Street, to the Arab Spring, and to the recent mass parks in the Geza Park in Istanbul, Turkey, when you saw all that happening on the news. It's a great TED Talk. And she talks about how digital technology has made it very, very easy to build a large crowd quickly, very easy to get people riled up and passionate and excited. But a common problem for almost all of the recent large protest movements has been their inability to achieve outcomes that were proportional to the size and the energy that the movements inspired. In other words, basically not much happened. The movements happen, but the policies they're protesting are still there. So why haven't they been more successful, she asks. And Tufekci suggests that people in the movements have overlooked the benefits of doing things the hard way, the slow way, and the old-fashioned way. They're good at building crowds and generating excitement and passion, but not at the slow, sustained, unglamorous, nitty-gritty efforts of building communities and networks and relationships. A contrasting example would be Rosa Parks and the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955. Rosa Parks was not the first African-American woman to be arrested for sitting in the whites-only section of a bus. She wasn't. So why did her arrest make such an impact? Because Rosa Parks, among other things, well, number one, she was likable. People liked her, okay? That goes a long way in life. But on top of that, she was deeply, and maybe because of that, she was deeply connected in tons of social networks all over the city of Montgomery. Church groups, civic groups, service groups, a choir. She was active in a very big and active gardening club, for example, and in local civil rights groups as well. And because she was more connected, her arrest affected more people. And the bus boycott itself didn't happen spontaneously. They had been working on that for years. But Rosa Parks' arrest was the catalyst that set things rolling. So in 1955, in an era before Facebook and Twitter and texting, how did they get the word out about the boycott? Well, apparently a group snuck in the middle of the night into a university printing office, and they mimeographed 52,000 leaflets. A mimeograph, for those of you who are young, like a printing press. Okay. Smells really good. Always needed to be done in a ventilated area. Anyway, 52,000 leaflets that they passed out by hand. And in order to pass them out by hand, they used 68 African-American organizations in Montgomery to pass out the leaflets by hand. And they had to organize massive carpools so that people could get to work because they were boycotting the buses, and to make the boycott effective so they could do this sustained boycott. And it was magnificent, and they did it all without the interwebs. So I think Tufekci's observations are really insightful, and they apply to what we're doing as well. There's simply no substitute for the old-fashioned, slow and sustained effort of building communities and networks and relationships that lay the foundation for things to come. And I want to quote her here. She says, "The magic is in the capacity to think and to work together, which can only happen over time." It takes time. But when you think and work together over time, the magic does happen. And I think that's why what we're doing is so significant. Woody Allen once said that 90% of life is just showing up. 90% of Oasis is just showing up. And this is a good crowd for a holiday weekend. I mean, this is awesome. I'm so glad you're here. And there is no substitute for being here week after week, month after month, connecting with each other. And when I say here, I'm not just talking about here, I'm talking about service projects, social events, it takes effort to build community. You have to reach out and maybe make yourself a little vulnerable to meet people, so we can connect with each other, support each other as we can, get to know each other better, and it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. But ultimately, this is exactly how massive, widespread social change happens. It begins at the grassroots level in the simple acts that we do for each other of reading and learning names and working side by side at the food pantry or whatever. That's where it all starts, as it started in Montgomery. Because if you don't do that, you'll never get to the bus boycott. Does that make sense? So, because you do keep on showing up, something has happened. And it's creating a ripple effect that reaches from Toronto to Kansas City to Utah to the Pacific Northwest, and now soon many other places. And if all of us together keep at it and keep showing up, just keep showing up, communities of compassion and reason will become an unstoppable force for human good. Are you in? I'll take a few questions. I'd like to focus, if you have questions, I'd like to focus it more on the changing religious landscape topic. Sure.
I was just wondering.
The Josh, right?
Yes.
I learned your name today. See?
Yes, I'm one of the first guys. Now, one of the things I was just wondering, though, is, and I don't mean this to sound anti-immigrant, but as the U.S. is starting to go in trend to have higher immigrant
right.
percentage, from what I've read, usually immigrant populations tend to be more religious, than sometimes compared to the general population. Has that had any effect?
Great question. Okay, there tends to be more religious belief among immigrant populations. I've read some stuff to that effect. I have read, I should have checked this out, but I did read somewhere that Latinos are kind of experiencing a burst of, like, a lot of the people that are leaving Catholicism among and Latinos, by the way, 41%, yeah, 41% of the Roman Catholic Church, those who leave Catholicism are tending, not necessarily tending, but there's more of a trend towards becoming secular non-believers in that community. Now, in the overall scheme of the religious landscape, the non-Christian religions have increased a little over a percentage point. So it was 4.7% before, or maybe a little bit less. Anywhere in the 4 to 5% range of the overall population would include Muslims, Hindus, Jews, Buddhists, and other non-Christian religions. So that is definitely increasing, but it's not dramatic. So there is, and we have ample evidence here and within our community. I mean, we had a whole talk from Rodolfo and, why am I drawing a blank? Parola and Rodolfo did a whole talk about non-belief in the Latino community, which is a fascinating talk. And then, of course, we have a lot of immigrants from South Asia and the Middle East in our group that have left Islam. So, of course, that's anecdotal. So it'll be interesting to see what trend happens there. Yeah. Okay, I'll do, I'm gonna watch the time. Josh, and then Richard and Johnny. I mean, sorry, not Josh, Pat. Sorry, I already talked to Josh. Patrick?
I was just wondering, you're saying that the evangelicals are sort of holding steady, but they're not keeping up with the general population. Do you think maybe the Quiverful movement and their massive breeding project has something to do
Higher birth rates, perhaps? The Quiverful movement was a reference to, there might be someone here, is anyone here who is a former Quiverful person? You might not want to admit it, actually. But it was a movement basically to have lots of evangelical babies. Yeah. That'd be interesting to know if that had an impact. I think there's also a little bit of migration that's going from maybe conservative Christians and mainline groups are sometimes shifting over to more conservative evangelical groups because they don't like, let's say you're an Episcopalian and you don't like, the stance, because they tend to be very open to things like gay marriage, and they developed a right for gay marriage in the Episcopal Church. So there has been, so it might be a combination of factors like a migration of conservative Christians towards evangelical churches, and also, the higher birth rate could definitely play a role, but they're still not keeping up with, their percentage of the overall population is dropping. Richard?
I work with a lot of immigrants, and so I think what you're saying, there's something to that, but it depends, of course, on where they're coming from. I work with a lot of Chinese, for example, and of course they're coming from a predominantly secular society. And so I think...
Speak up just a little bit louder, I can't hear you.
So a number of the Chinese that I work with, for example, they come here and they're secular, because that's what they've always been, and they're coming from a secular society. And yet when they come here, they often are not connected. And so then frequently in fact, they're picked up by Chinese who are already here, who are deeply into the Christian thing, and then even though they're not historically Christian, they end up, just for social reasons, going into those groups. And so I think that speaks again to us being visible, so that's another option for people as they come into the melting pot.
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah. Johnny, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. So we've seen the rise of the nuns and their numbers, but I'm not sure if nuns are necessarily as non-religious, because they may not attend a kind of church or something like that. But I think a lot of them probably believe in God or spiritual, but not
right.
religious. How non-religious, how secular are the nuns?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't have, how secular are the nuns? I was going to give an answer, but I was just going to make it up. So. I think it's a really good question. It'd be interesting. I will go do some homework and I will post something on the private group. Your observation is correct that there are a lot of people that are not religious but still consider themselves spiritual or have some kind of vague belief in a God. And I think that's one reason why we're building a community that, if the Oasis movement were focused only on self-identified atheists and agnostics, we wouldn't be having chapters exploding all over North America right now. So we're about, we're not an activist group. We're about building the social relationships that are free from dogmas and superstition. So it's kind of a new concept, and it doesn't fit in a lot of people's boxes. I mean, people want to call us, well, you're an atheist church. Well, no. I really don't care if you believe in God or not, personally. As long as you're okay with the core values, which make no reference to a deity or dogmas or this is really supposed to be a community for humanity and a movement for humanity. And so, we have people all over the spectrum here, and I kind of like that, actually. So, because we can all love each other and be kind to each other, and, set a good example. But I am secular, Okay.
The answer to the question that was just asked is buried in the retort. And it may be a different one entitled The Rise of the Nuns by the Peter Search Center.
Oh.
A very significant number believe in God. As I remember, it was more than 50%. In fact, a significant number pray every day.
You're right. Thank you for reminding me of that, Fred. There was another report called The Rise of the Nuns. You said 50% do not or do?
Do.
Okay, so 50% of the nuns probably don't believe. What is the other half? It's the blood pressure medicine. Okay. Good. Hey, well, I think we're in a good spot to wrap it up. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you sense that the stuff I talked about at the end, I'm very, very passionate about. Do not take for granted being here. Do not take for granted this community. What we're doing together. When we come together on Sunday morning, it is more than a group of friends getting together on Sunday morning, because it is. Oh, this is great. Because as Johnny alluded to earlier, a lot of people are traveling now. I think Verena Kalhoff posted a suggestion that people post their "People Are More Important Than Beliefs" T-shirts in interesting places around the world. She said she's planning a picture at the Eiffel Tower. We saw Eric Anderson, our president, had one in a beautiful Colorado setting. Another person in Colorado texted me. Do not text me your picture. Post it on the Facebook thing. I do not know how to use my phone. But if you need a mimeograph, I can do that. Okay, but do not. And then, but then, what's even more thrilling is I saw in northern Wasatch, which is Ogden, Utah, and Wasatch Back, which is Park City, Utah, and that people are, and all over, they're developing their own T-shirts with the core values, posting them in different places, all of which are much more beautiful than Houston, and they live there. And but it's these ideas are have legs, and people are getting excited about it. And so thank you for being here, because this is awesome, and you're bringing other people hope. So thanks for being here. Thanks for letting me chat at you and share some ideas. And I guess I'll turn it back to John.